Nuovo Pasta makes pasta, so I am a pasta maker. And I make it because I believe that pasta is the one individual food that is truly emblematic of joy and love. Truly believe that.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. Today, I'm with Carl Zuanelli of Nuovo Pasta. Carl, thank you so much for coming on today.
No, thank you for having me.
Literally my pleasure. It is the Made in America podcast, Carl, so we got to start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Wow, good question. Nuovo Pasta makes pasta, so I am a pasta maker. And I make it because I believe that pasta is the one individual food that is truly emblematic of joy and love. Truly believe that.
That pasta is the one food that's emblematic of joy and love. But
universally embraced as it.
You got to tell me why. I mean, what are we talking, Lady and the Tramp here? What do we got?
No, I don't mean that kind of love, although maybe some people could think about it that way. And certainly Lady and the Tramp, there is that magical piece of linguine that allows those lovers to unite.
That's right.
Never thought about it that way. But, you know, I give you an example of what I mean during COVID. If you take a look at that one food item that really brought the world together was pasta. There was articles written about it. Very many items on the supermarket shelf were vanishing, but pasta vanished at even a more rapid pace than most. And one of the reasons is that during times of difficulty, people pivot and embrace a known. And that known, in this case, was pasta. We've heard that China and Italy and all of that pasta is from the East and West, but it's universally in so many different cultures. Noodles and or filled pastas, whether it be an empanada or ravioli or an arepa.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing.
All the same thing. It's really fascinating, as you're talking about it. It reminds me that it's like one of the things that everyone knows how to make. Like I feel like maybe not always as well as they could, but just thinking about like in my bachelor days when, there's very little I could reliably make, but I could make a pasta, macaroni, ravioli, like you could always make it. And there's so many different ways to do it. And then you just sauce it up.
You talk about ramen noodle, for example. I'm really good friends with the former CEO, just retired, of Nissan Ramen Noodles, the original ramen noodle and the largest in the world. And it just gives people joy, right? When they eat it. I see my children eating ramen noodles. And, and something that I hear often when people eat, and I don't think it's a compliment about food, is when they put something in their mouth and they say, interesting, right? I don't know if that's a compliment. I don't think that any words are better than just the facial expression when something's put into your mouth. I don't know too many people that don't enjoy pasta. And there's reasons why people, maybe not great reasons, don't eat it because they think that it might not be good for you in terms of your a nutrient, but they're mistaken. But I don't know anybody who doesn't like it and enjoy it when they eat it. And I really think that it is all about love and joy. And certainly preparing food is that. And I get that kind of joy preparing pasta and having other people eat it.
Well, obviously you have a love of pasta. There's no question about it. And your last name's Zuanelli. Probably people could connect that to pasta.
Yeah.
But how did you get into the pasta game? This was not a family business. This wasn't something sort of passed down from the generations. Let's start with the audience, your sort of origin story from a pasta maker.
Well, origins, from the youngest day, probably the first solid food I ever ate in my life was pasta. There's something called pastina. As a matter of fact, it's in the news recently because there is a shortage of pastina. in the marketplace.
What is pastina?
Pastina is almost exactly what it implies. It's pasta, and anything with ina on the end of it usually means small or tiny, right?
Tiny,
like tortellini,
right,
or tortellino means a small version of a torta, and the pastina is very tiny little pieces of pasta that are usually boiled and either served in a soup, but are given in Italian culture to very young children, mixed with egg and cheese and butter. And it's just so magically delicious. So it's probably the first thing I ever ate. And then I grew up in an Italian-American culture, at least in the household that I was raised. I was raised in the same household as my maternal grandparents. I don't think my grandmother spoke more than about a dozen words of English her entire life, and she spent well over 40, 50 years in the U.S. But having said that, there was pasta in the house, not only weekly, but multiple times during the week, and it was just interwoven into the fabric of what we were.
Did you always dream of being a pasta maker?
I never dreamed of being a pasta maker. Sometimes I have dreams now, but I had never dreamt that I would ever be a pasta maker. What I really did know was that I was going to have my own business.
That was from the get-go. You had that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah. I have an uncle who is a mentor who has his own airplane parts business. He was born in Italy, and he really rose to a high level of success in the aeronautics business. And from a business, or at least an entrepreneurial perspective, he was a mentor. My father certainly was a big mentor of mine in business. But so I always wanted to have my own business. And I didn't know what it would be, but I knew that I wanted to have my own business. And at one point in life, it dawned on me that it had to do something with making something, which I always liked doing.
So it wouldn't be a consulting business. It wasn't going to be a law firm. It was going to be something that made a product of some kind.
Right.
And so how did you get into pasta? Like what point are you sitting around going, I want to make my own business. I want to make something. You know, what would be smart is to make pasta.
Right. I graduated from Pace University, went to 4 years of business school there. And I had learned a lot about business, not in school, but I was involved in cooperative education programs, and I worked for Citibank full-time at one point, going to school full-time in the evenings and on weekends to finish my degree. And while I was at Citibank, I started to understand business in a different way, from the financial perspective and also from the corporate perspective and the managerial perspective. And I realized what a true business was. My father was in financial services also. I knew innately that I didn't want a career in financial services, but
it was just in your bones. Like you're doing it, but you're like,
right,
this isn't for me.
That particular type of business was not it for me, but it was really educational. Mm. And when I found myself at Merrill Lynch some years later, and in 1987, I was in Manhattan, at the Fifth Avenue Financial Center at the time, and there was a crash. And the crash was in 1987, as I mentioned, and it was the largest crash of the stock market that had taken place since the Great Depression. And there was a forecasted recession coming on. And I said, this is the time to start my own business. If there's a time, this is the time to get out. And I was okay. I was doing well, and was a young man, didn't have a mortgage, wasn't married at the time. And I started to take a look at businesses that could be recession resistant. And I heard, and it made sense, that food was recession resistant. I started to do a lot of research. And per capita consumption in the 1980s was going through the roof with pasta. It wasn't just an ethnic food any longer in the U.S., eaten by Italian Americans. It was now a high-end food in restaurants that took the names, instead of restaurant, as trattoria and hosteria and ristorantes, which didn't exist when I was a child in the 70s growing up. It was the...
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk about that because you and I talked about that before the show a little bit, and that was not something I even knew about, right? Just I grew up in the, was born in the late 70s, but grew up really in the 80s and wasn't going out to restaurants really sort of by myself without my parents till the early 90s, and these were always staples of like the restaurant scene. It was interesting that you kind of told me the story about how when you got into this business, that was like a new thing that was sort of up and coming, a new wave of sort of American restaurant culture.
Right. There's a phrase now that dining in is the new dining out. In the old days, dining in was the only way.
Was the only way, right.
Unless it was a special occasion. You really didn't go to a restaurant, depending on your socioeconomic demographic, of course. But there really wasn't a choice of restaurants that we see today. We just take it for granted. And you alluded to Lady and the Tramp, and the type of Italian restaurants, for the most part, were the red and white checkered tablecloth restaurants, or something called Northern Italian, where the same type of cuisine, a little bit more elevated, was served by waiters in tuxedos. I mean, there really wasn't much of a difference. But at the same time, slowly, there was this invasion of Nouveau Italian, quite frankly, that people don't really remember, but in the 1980s it happened. And long ponytailed Italians with white aprons that would go down to their ankles in high fashion, standing outside of the ristorantes, would have these Italian restaurants with an elevated form of Italian dining that really wasn't the immigrant Italian dining. It was what was happening in Italy today. Just traditional food, but evolved. Almost like what a Ferrari is today compared to what it was, right?
Right.
And so these restaurants started, and the bistro version of it is the trattoria. And I had seen that in New York because there was really a concentration of it just booming in Manhattan. And I said, that's the type of pasta that needs to be in the marketplace. I also, during the research, saw a company that in 1986, a little small fresh pasta company called Lambert's Pasta and Cheese, which was doing about $6 million in revenue, was acquired by Nestle for $36 million.
Oh, that's some math you could do.
Yeah, and that sort of affirmed the fact that this fresh pasta, higher end, it was the route to go.
And so from that concept, how does Nuovo Pasta get started? I mean, where do you go buy a factory? You co-pack? Like, how do we launch?
Great question. I had known some investors, obviously, from the business that I was in, and I put together a business plan and I approached them, and they said, "This sounds great. Love what you're talking about. Like that multiple of sales that the Lamberts was sold." Right? Yeah. What do you know about making pasta? They said to me. And except for observing my grandmother make it and cut noodles on a table and then put a linen sheet on a very large, is it probably a king-size bed, and dry those noodles out, I had never really witnessed pasta production. So the investors said, "Why don't you get some experience and come back?" And I did. I traded in the pinstripe suit and started to make pasta. And the way I did that was I went to some factories in the New York metropolitan area, but none of them were really making this new style pasta that I was alluding to earlier. They were making the stuffed shells of the 1950s, and this is not what I was talking about. It was a different type of pasta that I was looking to make. And there was one restaurant that had opened up in South Norwalk, Connecticut, called Pasta Nostra, and the New York Times had just given it an excellent rating. And my mother said to me, "Carl, you should really check this restaurant out."
Pasta Nostra, that was the name of it?
Pasta Nostra.
I like it.
Yeah, and catchy.
It's a clever name, yeah.
Clever. The fellow was from Brooklyn, and he was actually a hippie, an Italian Brooklyn hippie, if you could imagine such a thing, that opened this place up, and it was packed when I drove by one evening. Packed. People standing outside waiting to get in, and
really?
Celebrities eating inside. And the next day I went back, and I looked in the window, and there was a collection of Italian pasta making equipment. And the owner was standing in the window making ravioli. And when I walked in, and I didn't have my pinstripe suit on, I looked like I was a recent college grad, which I was. And I hit him up for a job. I said, I'd love to learn how to make fresh pasta. I introduced myself. He looked at me and he said, who is this guy? And he said, do you know anything about cooking? And I said, no, I really don't. He said, he said, if you're willing to learn how to cook, I could use help in the kitchen, and I'll teach you how to make pasta. And I did, and went back to Merrill Lynch. I was still working at Merrill, and told them that I would be leaving. And I'd give them my 2 weeks notice, and they ushered me to the door.
No 2 weeks.
You don't give them 2 weeks notice. And a couple of days later, I found myself in that white apron, standing in a window covered with flour.
Pasta Nostra.
Making pasta Nostra.
That's so what, and people have asked me this, so I don't know if you'll be able to answer it either, but what sort of gave you, I don't know if courage is the right word, but I know a lot of people don't take that path, right? They get the no from the investors. You need more experience, and then they lament for 25 years. I could have, would have done this, but I needed experience, and I was in that conundrum. Don't have it, won't get the money till you get it, and I can't make the money to get it. And they go to ask the job to learn pasta, and the guy says, if you work in the kitchen, and then some people say, well, I'm not here to work in the kitchen. I'm here to, but you,
right.
If you humbled yourself, I don't know what it is, but what do you think was in you, or what were you thinking about for you to say, yeah, I'm gonna stick with it, and I'm gonna take this other gig to get to the higher purpose?
I like to say I was humbled myself, but my wife would
disagree.
Would say that's not one of your strong skill sets just yet.
Fair enough.
I think it was a naive confidence. I kind of likened it to a Walenda walking on a tightrope. I don't know if you're familiar with the Walenda family, right?
Sure, yeah.
Right. No one tells them they can't.
So therefore you can.
Right? And it's not always going the way you plan it, right? So if someone says, can you cook with me? You say, sure, because I really want that goal. But I, quite frankly, cooking and learning how to cook from a master really elevated my understanding of food, which helped with the pasta. The restaurant's still open. It's been through a couple of iterations. It's still open. It's magnificent. The people that really know food that I've brought there say it's the best restaurant north of New York City. I'm not giving Pasta Nostra a plug. Maybe I am. But anyway, I learned how to make product there. And it was sort of a naive confidence, let me say. And I think most entrepreneurs have that. I was talking about to our executive team, common sense. And the thing about common sense is everyone has it, and that's why it's called common. Whether you use it or not is a whole different thing. And I think a lot of creative people oftentimes don't use it as much as they should, common sense. But in a way, it's a good thing that they don't.
Listen, we'll pivot back to the story, but I just, I think that for any people that's out there that are listening, especially young people, I think it's, when you're in your early 20s, you may feel this pressure to like achieve, but that's a really great opportunity to try something new, take a flyer, take a risk. And I think you hit the nail on the head, which is sometimes you don't realize how these twists and turns actually become huge assets in ways you didn't realize. You went to learn pasta, and in the process learned how to cook, which informs future pasta R&D. I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I can only imagine understanding how to cook pasta and do it at a quality place must be so helpful in figuring out how to make the right pasta to meet that market down the line.
100%. I mean, you said it. You mentioned R&D. I mean, even to be able, we have an R&D team extraordinaire at Nuovo. Who leads the R&D team is a fellow who is a master chef by accreditation. He was also a professor at the Culinary Institute. Also, our head of R&D, who was our R&D chef, and this is a separate individual, was an R&D chef at Nestle, was the corporate executive chef for some major multi-unit national restaurant chains. And I can speak to them in a language that they communicate in because I know, and they know I know. So I'm on the R&D team. We also have a corporate chef at Nuovo. There's 3 chefs and myself who really do the R&D, and that's what we were out yesterday before we were on air, talking about Cleveland, we were out there doing R&D, creating
Nice.
sauce recipes.
Which I'm gonna get to, but we didn't. So you're at the Pasta Nostra. You learn how to cook, and then what happens after that? You learn how to make the pasta. Then you open the factory.
Good question. So a year goes by, and I really did learn how to cook pretty well. Some people say, and I learned how to make pasta, and I presented this pasta to those investors. And they said, "This is great. What do you know about running a manufacturing company?"
Another hurdle.
This was a hurdle that was a bridge too far. I was not going to get involved in a manufacturing company. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would have saved 35 years worth of learning. But my parents were kind enough to open up their basement in Wilton, Connecticut, where they had moved. And with a small tabletop pasta piece of equipment, I started making pasta.
In your parents' basement.
My parents' basement.
Food grade pasta out to the marketplace, right out of the basement.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I had met someone at Pasta Nostra who was also going on to their entrepreneurial ambition, which was to open up restaurants. And before that individual did, he had heard that I was making pasta in my parents' basement, and he knocked on the door in Wilton. He asked if he could help, and he did. And early on, he was a partner.
Really?
Yeah, so I had a partner at that time, and we became really good friends. And later on, he did go out and separated from Nuovo to start his business, which was, I don't know if you know it, but Barcelona. It's
yeah, of course. Barcelona Wine Bar, Bartaco, Bartaco, then Bartaco.
Yeah. Sasha Marpatus. He was one of the founders of that, and it became a chain up and down the East Coast.
They did very well.
They did sensationally well. And he's still a good friend.
There's a little origin of Nuovo Pasta in that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So how did you get out of the basement? Like, how do you go from
That's a really good
little, hand pasta machine to
literally and metaphorically getting ousted out of the basement? The local health inspector started to see tractor trailers of flour being delivered, and I guess a neighbor had an eyebrow raised by seeing that and said, "I don't know what they're doing over there, but they probably shouldn't be doing it." And while we were out making deliveries, the health inspector asked my mother what's going on, and she innocently told them, and they said, "Cease and desist, can't do that."
Immediately. Shut it down.
Immediately, right? Immediately. And it was immediately shut down. And quite frankly, I had a little good business going there for about 3 months. Although the concept and the original business plan was written to be a consumer product, we started out selling to restaurants, and which was a good thing because we were talking to chefs who really gave us their own critiques and what they thought they would want.
Really quick feedback cycle too, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to wait to go to distribution, to go out to the store, and then how do the people going to?
Right.
I mean, known a few good chefs in my day. They don't hold back, and they'll give you that feedback quick.
Right. Exactly. They sure did. They really didn't like the seaweed linguine that we made. They thought it tasted a little bit like low tide. And they suggested maybe you do something else that goes with seafood, such as lemon dill fettuccine. So there's a lot of good suggestions. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. So the health department shuts you down. Then now you're finally looking for a factory at this point?
We find a factory in Fairfield, and we start out. And it was a lesson that I learned, that I thought that all the business that we had at that point would be gone. And we'd have to start from scratch. And when we reopened, they were saying, "Thank God you're back in business. We needed your product. We had it on our menus." And we started cranking the pasta out from there, and started opening up distribution in New York City and Boston and surrounding areas, and even down into Washington, D.C. And we caught the attention of, and this may be before some people's time that are listening, maybe even before your own, Ari, but there was Emeril Lagasse, who was one of the first celebrity chefs.
Yeah.
And he was in New Orleans, and he had a group of restaurants down there, and he only used our product when some friends of his tried it in New York City. So we were shipping down in New Orleans, and started doing business with high-end restaurants all over the country, including the White House, believe it or not.
Really?
Just a couple of years into business.
The White House is buying Nuovo Pasta.
The White House was buying Nuovo Pasta.
Is restaurant business still a big part of the business, or how much of it
It's almost completely evaporated.
That's almost completely gone. And so what was it replaced by? Because I mean, definitely want to sort of pivot to where you guys are today, which I know is in a lot more, still high quality, but large quantity production.
Right. 2008, some of us will remember. I talked about 87. The next big one, and there was the recession of 90, was 2008. And when 2008 hit the fan, what happened was people stopped dining out. But they really slowed it down.
Did they? I
almost completely stopped. And to the point that our business in the first quarter was off 30%, and that trajectory just
kept going.
Seemed that it was going into an abyss. And it was, as a matter of fact. And it dawned on me at that time that food wasn't recession resistant. And we had a little burgeoning retail business. And that retail business included some ShopRites. And a friend of mine, family, owned some ShopRites, and I was making a little delivery to one of them. And I was talking to the owner, who happened to be at the store that day. And he said, "Carl, how's business?" I said, "Horrible." And I told him, I said, the restaurants, everyone's fallen off. No one's going out to eat any longer. Everyone's reeling back. And I said, "How's business with you?" He said, "Fantastic." He said, "The high-end steaks, Carl, I can't keep in stock." And it dawned on me then that during recessions, people still need to eat. It's true, but they're not going out and dining. They're going to the supermarket. And in this case, because of all the dining activity that had taken place in the 90s and the early 2000s, and some phenomenon that also had taken place, such as what we don't call trophy kitchens any longer, but at that point was called trophy kitchens, where stainless steel appliances, which are the norm today, which weren't, and granite tops. And so these trophy kitchens, which weren't being used, were now being used. Mm-hmm. And the Food Network, which had gotten some traction, teaching people how to cook, people now would do this at home, and they did. And they bought higher end items. And when that light bulb went off, I said, aha. And we quickly restructured Nuovo to be a consumer pack product and started packaging the product for retail and started shipping it. And in 2008, our business that was 30% down in the first quarter ended 5% up in revenue.
Really? For the whole year? So you rode the dip and the new flip.
It was amazing. Amazing.
And you pivoted to new packaging? Because I assume
everything, new packaging, new processing. We had to pasteurize the product. We had small little machines, and we just started cranking. And then we when I say we, the company just pivoted to all of its activities going towards consumer packaged goods.
How did you get the distribution? Because I mean,
interesting.
Because I don't know a lot about CPG, but I do know shelf space in grocery stores is really hard to get.
Well, it is, and in 2008, we had about $1 million worth of retail business. It wasn't just the local ShopRites, but it was about $1 million, and it was probably 20% of our overall business. And we had hired a VP. At this point, we were beginning to build an executive team. And we had hired a salesperson who was a vice president at Purdue Chicken. Mm-hmm. This is before 2008, and it was 2006, I think, or 2007. And he pioneered the rotisserie chicken product line for Purdue, and that's sold in the deli sections of supermarkets. So too is refrigerated pasta. And after realizing that this was the way to go, we had been approached before 2008 by Costco. And I know they would bury us. And I heard stories about it. And love you, Costco. And thank you for all you've done. And many, many others beside Costco, quite frankly. But at that time, we went after Costco. And although we had business at Whole Foods and other places, we started selling to Costco, and then we started to sell to Trader Joe's and BJ's and even Sam's Club and then other supermarkets. And we continued to offer unique things at Whole Foods and other places that had a little bit different of a clientele. And soon enough, the business started year after year having very high double-digit revenue growth year after year after year. And it just allowed Nuovo to catapult. So we actually went elephant hunting early on.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
And you thought Costco could bury you because the volume of the orders would just overwhelm your capacity. Is that what you mean by
Well, that's one thing. But also, if they turn off the switch and you gear up for that, it's the reason why we went elephant hunting for different banners. Because if
a herd of elephants, you can survive losing one. But if you only have one elephant.
It's very well said.
Yeah, interesting. And so the company's totally pivoted to just prepackaged, fresh pasta, refrigerated pasta?
Yeah, with the heritage being chef-oriented or directed towards restaurants, because our chefs were really our customers. We kept that same type of culture in our product line. And started selling that in the marketplace. And again, supermarkets around the country nowadays have that offering. So it's really a restaurant experience in someone's own home, as the dining.
The dining,
the new dining out.
Put your trophy kitchen to work. So when you think about, you mentioned something earlier, which I love to dig into a little bit, which is pasta has developed. I don't know if it's a bad reputation, but a difficult reputation. There's the gluten or the whatever, and I just wonder how you've kind of pivoted through that. Those trends come and go. But.
It's interesting you say that. Someone sent me, a friend of mine in Italy sent me an article about food futurism, 1930 Italy, where the futurists were completely against pasta in Italy. Yeah, kind of crazy. And it kind of tied into fascism, believe it or not. I won't go too deep in that, but there's always been those that have dissed pasta.
There you go.
Whether saying it's bad for you or it's not culturally elevated, or whatever the new reason du jour not to eat pasta is. And I've seen the Atkins diet and others. But the Mediterranean diet, which is a very sound diet, calls for that type of consumption of that type of carbohydrate, which historically is made of a very hard wheat called durum, durum being the Latin word for hard, right? And this hard wheat has a little bit more of a digestive nature than most. There has been this gluten intolerance, which can't be negated. Many people are still trying to understand that and scratch their head, and I haven't heard good reasons why there is a gluten intolerance today where it didn't seem to exist in times past, and that has to do a lot with allergens. And I don't think there's any conspiracy theory, but there's just an oddity that we see it more and more today in so many different ways. But there are those people that are affected by levels of gluten, and there are those types of pasta, whether they be gluten-free or low-gluten products, some ancient grain products, which many people who don't have severe gluten intolerance can enjoy today.
And doesn't seem like it's really impacted your ability to grow the business or the flow of the product.
Yeah. I think there are pasta eaters, and I think everybody's a pasta lover, but there are those that are pasta eaters that want to continue to enjoy pasta. I think there's a new generation of pasta eaters out there because it's so versatile in the manner in which it can be prepared. And I think people who want to eat pasta are going to continue to eat pasta. I think that people who go to McDonald's, who want to eat McDonald's, are really not looking for the low-cal Big Mac.
Right.
They want to eat what they are there for to eat, which is something that they enjoy, which is the Big Mac. And I'll leave it there. But I've got my feelings about fake meat and all of that too. I think those people that want to eat meat are going to eat meat, and those people that don't want to, there's good reason why they may not want to, shouldn't.
Right, mix it in, mix it out. But it's funny, actually, unrelated to the show, we were talking about this earlier, and I was just saying, after having tried all the different pasta substitutes, once I go back to the real thing, it's just a lot more satisfying. Yeah, that's been good. So thinking about sort of pivoting and trying new things, what is Nuovo doing? What do you do to sort of keep fresh and relevant? What do you do to try and make stuff new? You brought this pasta for people that are listening only, which is totally cool. That's how I consume the show myself. But it's like heart-shaped Valentine's a pasta box. What kind of stuff do you guys do to be creative and relevant and innovate in a millennia old industry? Right.
Good question. The word nuovo itself means new in Italian, nuovo, and it's the root culture of Nuovo, the continuous innovation, and it's rooted in Italian tradition, where there's a continual rebirth in Italy. Renaissance, the rebirth, is largely pointed to Italy, right, in the late 1400s, and it's the land of the Ferrari as much it is the land of the gold gilded furniture that people think of as Italy too. It's the land of the straight line, right, as well as some. I don't want to get too in depth about art, but the chiaroscuro, the dark light in painting. So there's so much, but there's constant innovation going on too. Embracing the past, but not being tethered by it, and always one hand reaching into the future and one hand back to the culture of Nuovo. So our R&D team is taking a look always at what the culture is and then what it can be. So we have something now called a Tour of Italy product, Nuovo, and it takes regional cuisines of Italy, because Italy is oftentimes painted with one big broad brushstroke, and it's not a very big peninsula, but it has so many different cultures in it. I mean, the culture from Calabria and the culture in Venice are about as different as Germany and Portugal.
Right.
Even dialects, and the foods are the same, right? In Calabria, they're known for the supersata, and they're known for a very hot chili pepper, Calabrian peperoncini, and that wouldn't be consumed in Venice. Basil pesto is not consumed in Bari, Italy, right? Apulia. These various cuisines are unique to these regions. What we've done is we've taken those regional cuisines and we've reinvented them, given them a new life, a rebirth, in the form of a filling in a pasta, in a ravioli or a tortellini, or in a sachet we call sacchetti, where we would take Emilia-Romagna has Reggiano Parmigiano and prosciutto di Parma, and we would take those two items and combine them together and put them into a large format tortellini called a tortelloni, right? And we would then market it that way. So we're continually innovating, but at the same
hard to focus because you're making me really hungry right now. But go ahead.
Yeah, and then to the point that I said, the kind of joking about the seaweed linguine, but it was true. We made something like that. So we're always looking at what's the next thing and what does somebody want to eat, either with the doughs of the pasta, which we get fairly creative with in terms of the flavor or the coloring of it, because people do eat with their eyes. Listen, eating is a very sensual experience. And when I mean sensual, I don't mean sexy. I mean the senses, right? All of the organoleptics. It's you look at the food and you smell the food. Quite frankly, listening to it being cooked, whether it be in a frying pan or the clanking of the dishes while you're eating, it's very organoleptic or sensual. And I think about that in all of the aspects of the product, and what the consumer, and I don't mean consumer in terms of the dictionary or the economic term consumer. I really mean the individual who's consuming that product is feeling in terms of those senses when they eat it.
How do you go about, we have a lot of different manufacturers we've talked to, right? And making products and food's a different animal. It was really interesting that in the early years of Nuovo Pasta, you really had that great feedback loop with top tier chefs that were doing amazing things in amazing restaurants from New Orleans to Boston and all places in between. And now you're in that other realm, right? Where you're at least 2, maybe 3, 4 steps between you and the person, the way you term the consumer, right? The person who's actually ingesting and having that sensual experience, who smells it being made, who sees it on the plate, who, puts the fork to it, feels it, right? And then feels it in their mouth, smells it and eats it. How do you maintain that sort of feedback loop? How do you get the feedback from that consumer all the way back to help you know what to make, what's working, what's not working?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. Daily, that product is cooked at Nuovo. We have in one of our Connecticut facilities 3 production lines, and that produces over 22 million pounds of product a year. And on those 3 individual lines, twice in the morning and twice in the afternoon, product is taken and brought into the office, cooked without sauce, and we try it. At least I try it every day.
Every day.
Every day. And I don't know if for those the young folks listening to this can Google search this. There's a Breakstone, I think it was a sour cream commercial. There was a guy named Sam Breakstone, and he used to always try the, and if we take a look at even Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, there was the guy who had the candy factory and he was always eating the candy. It never dawned on me that I would be trying the product every day, but I have to, because it needs to stay on the rails. And it's very easy to come off the rails. Different supplier, same supplier, different quality ingredient comes in, a glitch in the production. So that's one way. The other way is social media.
Using the new technology. Speaking of Nuovo, embracing the new technology to get that
getting
direct
reviews, right? Which are always good, both the critiques and the positive reviews that help you along the way. So it's a little bit of the old method and the new method of it. And then there's always the anecdotal method, which is really good too. I remember I have some boys, three sons, and one of them was playing soccer one year, and I was on the sideline. And a dad came up to me, one of the boys, fellow teammates of my son, and he said, I heard you're in the pasta business. Yeah. He said, we go to a particular supermarket, maybe I shouldn't name it, and we were doing a private label there. And he said, they have this beef bolognese ravioli. That's unbelievable. I suggest you try it. It's really good, he said to me. And this is a national chain, and we had been supplying this national chain with the beef bolognese ravioli now that year, probably 4 or 5 years already. And he said, this is a Wednesday night item. We have it every Wednesday night. So some of those edifying, anecdotal conversations are pretty cool too.
Oh, that's extremely cool, and that's really funny. It's like quoting you back to yourself. Listen, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to talk about, you mentioned, offhand to me that you guys are doing something really interesting with pesto. And so when I think about kind of new innovations, that was something that I was thinking about, and wonder if you might be willing to share with the audience kind of your pesto story.
Yeah, I will. As a matter of fact, one of the fringe benefits of Nuovo is I get back and forth to Italy frequently, up to 5 times a year, as a matter of fact. And, not during COVID so much, and as I was mentioning earlier, regionally, Italy is known for specific ingredients, and one of them, the region of Genoa. Or it's the actual region is called Liguria. Genoa is the principal city in it, is known for its basil, but we usually hear pesto genovese from the city. And someone said, Carl, you should really think about making a basil pesto with basil from the motherland, the epicenter of where pesto's from. And our R&D chef really took the lead on this, and from the consortium, found some of the best basil growers. And we today import many containers a year of basil directly from the port of Genoa. And we then take that product in America and we make it into a pesto, which I would say rivals any pesto made in Liguria today. And many Ligurians have said that. They can't taste the difference between what we do and what's done in Liguria. So we make a classic Italian pesto made in America with Italian parts. In this case, Italian ingredient base.
I love it. Italian ingredient, Italian parts, American-made pesto. That's awesome. It's just great, Carl, to see the journey and how much you mean a major pivot in your life and with the product and continuing to innovate. The passion is really just tremendous. What do you see for the future? You think one of the 4 kids has a future at Nuovo?
Maybe all of them, maybe none of them, right?
Right,
You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Right, Dad got rid of the business before we could run it, or Dad saddled us with this business, right? So,
why didn't he ask us to help? Why is he always asking us to help? Yeah.
It's a no-win scenario. I'm not sure. I do know that one of the declarations that our executive team has made is that we'll be a national brand, and we, at the same time, will make a deep footprint in a local social impact and a global impact. And we're doing both of those things. Nuovo is a big sponsor of CIRI, which is the Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants, locally, so that's Connecticut, and globally. We're involved with Tony Robbins' 100 Billion Meal Challenge. As a matter of fact, I'm on Tony's advisory board, and we're working in conjunction with the World Food Program at the UN to help fight global food insecurity. And we've encouraged the rest of the pasta community, both internationally. I happen to be the president of the IPO, International Pasta Organization, based in Rome, and the NPA, National Pasta Association chair. And we've got them to sign a board in this mission to help fight global food insecurity by donating meals.
That's amazing.
So that's one of the things that Nuovo is doing now and into the future.
What's the Billion Meal Challenge?
That's a really good question. I don't know if you're familiar with Tony Robbins.
I know who he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tony,
we're not friendly on a first name basis, but I've heard.
Maybe
of
you should be.
Yeah, well, it could be. Yeah, there you go.
He's a really, really affable guy. He grew up in a home that was challenged with food insecurity. He grew up not very wealthy at all, and he made it his life's mission to try to end global food insecurity in the world. And certainly the UN World Food Program that's their mission. Mm-hmm. And David Beasley, who's a great man, former senator governor of South Carolina, has been the president of the World Food Program for many years. And he's worked together with Tony, and Tony came up with a concept of a billion meal challenge to feed 1 billion people over 10 years. And he said, why not do 100 billion? And because he wanted to do it in the U.S., and now it's global. And there's a organization called, and you could look it up, the 100 Billion Meal Challenge, that Tony Robbins and a great collection of people on the advisory board have gotten behind to help fight a gigantic problem in this world, which is food insecurity. You know, we don't experience it. Maybe a lot of the people that will be listening to this podcast don't. We open up the refrigerator and we see a completely filled refrigerator, or sometimes we say, darn, there's no more milk left, where there's people that open up that refrigerator and there's nothing in it. And there hasn't been milk in there for months. And this is happening right here in the U.S., and it's happening all over the world in developing and developed countries. And we're trying to do something about it.
That's really awesome. I mean, until we met, I didn't know we had hundreds of people making pasta here in Connecticut, and it's been really great to get to know you. And I think, you know, you're clearly passionate about what you do, and you guys do some amazing things. And to know that you're passionate about giving back, I think it's just, this is to me all the best of what I've seen from manufacturers that I talk to, you know, in Connecticut. Great story, great passion for what they do, but always kind of taking care of the world around them. So that's awesome, man. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, listen, I'm going to flip us over to rapid fire round of questions to wrap this thing up, and then we'll end it. Are you ready?
I think so.
All right, here we go. Red Sox or Yankees?
It has to be Yankees. Oh, sorry about that.
You saw the wall.
New York.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
Both.
Staycation or exotic destination?
Or both.
Both. He wants to do both. If you had to do something other than be the CEO and founder of Nuovo Pasta, it could be anything in the whole wide world, what would you do with your time?
Either a Tibetan monk or I'd work in the pot wash room cleaning pots and pans at Nuovo Pasta.
Ah, there you go. What do you have a favorite business book?
Famous business book? Yeah, I do. It has everything to do about business and nothing. It's the Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda.
Say it one more time.
The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. I know this is rapid fire, but it was the only book on Steve Jobs' iPad that they found when he passed away.
Oh, that's very interesting. I'll have to check that out. Carl, what's something that you learned early in your life or earlier in your career that you think helped propel you to all the success you've had?
Be true to yourself. And honesty is the best policy.
Amen to that. And what's something that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Carl, and if he'd listen to you, it'd have a real positive impact on his life?
Honesty is the best policy. And certainly be true to yourself. Don't do things because others think that this is what you should do. Do it because this is what you think that you should do.
Did you feel that pressure early on to live up to what other people wanted you to do?
No.
No, but it worked out not to do that. March to the beat.
There was that pressure, but I never. It sort of water off a duck's back. Yeah.
Amen to that, man. That's how great things happen.
Yeah.
Carl, it has been absolutely terrific having you on the show. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you very much for having me here. I'm truly grateful.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.